This is part 2 of our 4-week Antarctic Peninsula expedition with Stephen Venables and a group of ski mountaineers. In part 1, we crossed Drake's Passage and explored the northern part of the peninsula. If you missed it, catch up by clicking on the link in the top right corner.
Join us now for part 2 as we head to our furthest southerly point at 63 degrees south, the Pitt Islands. But let's start with an icy cold dip in some of the coldest waters in the world at approximately 2 degrees Celsius. The Swiss team led the way with diving demonstrations and in proper swimwear attire.
Whereas Joe and Sophie, representing the British team, didn't quite have the style shown by the Swiss, but fashion wasn't going to stop them taking the plunge. The only one being more British than Sophie was Joe, keeping his socks on.
This was our most southerly point on our expedition, reaching 63 degrees south, and just shy of the Antarctic Circle.
After this, we made our way to the Argentine Islands. It is here where the Ukrainian scientific Vernadsky research base is located.
We all had a tour. As it is an active station where the scientists live and work, we did not want to intrude by filming inside. That evening, we watched from the deck of Pelagic as a thick mackerel sky rolled in. These clouds denote strong winds are on their way. We had a plan to drop off the ski mountaineers at Couverville Island and knew we had a small weather window to make our way there.
The grip files that calm morning showed a maximum wind speed of 20 knots from the northwest. We headed out, but no sooner had we made our way into the channel, a full-blown force 10 hit. With driving snow, strong winds, and ice in the channel, we headed out into open water. Running with the wind, we circumnavigated the Argentine Islands until the winds eased and the channel cleared. 10 hours later, we ended up where we started, but now making our way safely into the channel to the south side of Booth Island. Here we anchored for the night. Pelagic Australis taking these conditions in a stride once again.
With the dawning of a new day, our plans to drop off the ski mountaineers could commence. Chris and I always like to rise before the crew to brief each other on the plan for the day.
With the engine running, we lifted the anchor and were on our way to Access Point to drop off the ski mountaineers.
Even as seafarers, spending most of our time on the water, it never ceases to amaze us how the weather can change so dramatically. 12 hours after the storm, all was calm.
We dropped off the ski mountaineers at Access Point on Couverville Island for their attempt to climb Mount Frances. We only picked them up 5 days later.
We didn't have time to film the drop-off, but stay with us as we caught all the pickup action on camera.
After this, we soon arrived at Couverville. This was one of the highlights for us. It is very shallow here, so we carefully navigated in using a handheld depth sounder in the dinghy ahead. We then dropped the anchor and secured 2 shorelines to a rocky outcrop.
Couverville is a special place. Being so shallow, the icebergs come to a grinding halt all around. Both big and small jagged icebergs make it a beautiful setting, as they are such a contrast to the smooth boulders ashore, making it a very textured landscape. With a colony of Gen 2 penguins here again, it was captivating to watch them navigate the boulders and icebergs, or simply cleaning themselves in the clear, shallow water. I climbed to the peak of Danko Island, and here was another Gen 2 colony. These were nesting on more jagged rocks with scree slopes down to the bottom, and the backdrop was spectacular.
As soon as Sophie and the rest of the team were back from Danko Island, we prepared to hoist the anchor. Andy released the lock and transferred the load from the bollard onto the windlass.
Yeah.
Ready?
I then started driving forward to take the load off the windlass, and Andy started raising the chain until he got to the snubber. He then secured the chain on the bollard again, eased it off the windlass, and freed it from the snubber. While still driving forward, he then raised the rest of the chain. If we have more than 20 meters of chain out, we always have a crew member flaking the chain in the chain locker to make sure it is untangled for the next drop. We encountered quite a bit of kelp in the high latitudes, and sometimes a big ball of it would get stuck on the anchor. For these occasions, Pelagic Australis had a custom-made kelp cutter on board, a long pole with a sharp blade on one end and a piece of string with a carabiner on the other, to attach it to the boat while cutting the kelp away. Once the anchor is fully up, we secure it with a loop of spectra and a ratchet to the starboard cleat. Take the load off the windlass and put a safety loop around the bollard. No sooner had we lifted anchor when ahead of the bow a pod of humpback whales appeared. Humpback whales migrate annually. During the austral summer months, they swim to the feeding grounds near the poles and then migrate back to warmer winter breeding waters closer to the equator. After centuries of whaling, their numbers were severely reduced. In many population groups, the numbers have improved since the 1985 ban on commercial whaling came into place. Today, the biggest threats to humpback whales are collisions with ships and entanglement in fishing gear. In 2019, members of the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators implemented a raft of measures, from a mandatory 10 knots speed restriction to additional whale lookouts to protect and support their return.
We briefly stopped at this tiny island and stepped ashore to see the small chinstrap and Gen 2 penguin colonies that nest amongst the rocks here. At the top of this rocky island, I came across a nest with 2 penguin chicks on it, of very different sizes. This reminds you of the harsh environment they endure. It is quite likely that the undersized chick wasn't going to make it to adulthood before the parents depart, especially with the predatory giant petrels and skuas lurking nearby.
Now, we come to the point whereby we were due to pick up Stephen Venables, Colin, and a team of ski mountaineers at Access Point on Anvers Island.
Ready? Okay, let go.
We didn't film the drop-off 5 days earlier, but this sequence captures the tasks involved. With the wind pushing Pelagic Australis and loose ice into the bay, we decided it was not safe to anchor along the rocky shores. So instead, with the engine running, I kept Pelagic at a safe distance from the shallow waters. Sophie and one of our crew did the multiple dinghy runs between Pelagic and the shore to get the 5 ski mountaineers and their gear back on board.
The landings were tricky with lots of submerged rocks near the shore. I had to gain some momentum in the dinghy and then quickly lift the outboard engine up as we approached the rocks. Werner stood by on the bow, ready to throw a line to the shore team to pull the dinghy in and stop it from being turned sideways to the swell. While Werner received the gear from the shore team, I kept the dinghy off the rocks using one of the big wooden paddles. Once the first load was on board, we pushed the dinghy off the rocks and paddled backwards until we were in deep enough water to drop and start the outboard engine again.
Okay, ready?
With a lot of kit and the mountaineers ashore, it meant numerous runs back and forth in the dinghy. With ice closing in, it meant us and the mountaineers ashore had to operate quickly to get back out.
Okay, go! Don't push yourself, Mike. Go, paddle. Paddle backwards.
Once all the crew were back on board, Sophie was handed a hot cup of tea to warm up.
Now that we had all regrouped back on board, we spent the last few days in one of our favourite places, Port Charcot. With Pelagic secured to the shore with 4 lines, it gave us an opportunity to wander ashore together. Here I took my tripod and stills camera and went in search of things to photograph. There was plenty to be inspired by, from the beautiful big boulders to the peaceful anchorage itself.
On our last day, we hopped back in the dinghy to explore the iceberg graveyard once again. No matter what time of day, Sophie will always pack a flask of tea. And here she is, enjoying it in this picturesque spot. Not a breath of wind and still calm waters. The conditions were perfect to bob around taking photographs.
The time had come to head north again, cruising up the channels. With fair weather on our side and an abundance of wildlife passing by, it was a peaceful bon voyage. We had been granted permission by the Chilean Navy to stop at Cape Horn, so this was something we all looked forward to. However, the fair weather didn't stay long, and although we managed to anchor off Cape Horn, the conditions meant we were unable to land. So we set sail for Puerto Williams to drop off all the crew.
The world was going into lockdown, and so, with no time to waste, we had to depart quickly and make our way back to the Falkland Islands. Just a few hours after we had left the Beagle Channel behind, we spotted a pod of orcas. When we arrived in Stanley and tied up to the public jetty, little did we know we would be spending the next 4 months here, riding out the COVID storm. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support our work, join us on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will also get early access to all our films. To stay up to date with our latest adventures, find and follow us on Instagram and Facebook.